Hi and welcome back to IT Pazunga YouTube channel. So in this demo, we are going to see how we can modify API responses using filters. Filters in ASP.NET Core application allow us to run code before and after specific stages during the request processing pipeline. So there might be various type of filters, each one executed at a different stages during our filter pipeline. So to understand this flow, we have to have some idea about what is middleware, what is pipeline, and what is filter and filter pipelines. Let's see, look at this diagram. So we will get some basic idea about this all these terms. So filter and the middleware are kind of a part of a pipelines. Imagine that when we receiving a request from the client, it should pass the middleware, then it will be filtered by our filters, then that should send to the database and response will come and return to the client. So this entire workflow will happen inside a pipelines. Imagine you are going one place to another place through a tunnel. Same way, we have to think about the request pipeline. So it comes beginning of the request place. It will be handled by the middleware. So if we see here, the request enter to the pipeline, then there might be middlewares. So it may be logging middlewares, authentication, and these things handle everything globally. For an example, initially the username password will be authenticated. Then only we have to think about authorization that should be handled by filter. So initially that authentication logging, the basic logging, the request is started. Likewise, the initial time block, those things we can have through the middleware loggings. Then once that request pass the middleware, then it's routed to a controller, particular controller. So that controller has filters. Those filter do the logging, validation, handle the request in action level. So when the request comes, it has to pass the middleware, then filters, and again it will come back to the another level of middlewares and filter, and it should return to the response to client. So if you see this flow, client request comes, it will handle by middleware 1, middleware 2, routing and filter again, and control actions. There might be another filter, another middleware, then response comes. So this is the normal HTTP flow when a request comes from the client. So I hope this gave you an idea about how an HTTP request involved in various stage, then that should pass the middlewares, pipelines to reach that response. So let's see. So in this demo, we are going to discuss how we can modify these responses, API responses using filters. And last demo we have seen how we can modify the errors using error handlers. So we can create custom error handlers pages to handle the errors. So now we are going to modify the responses using filters. So let's see what are the filters we have. What are the type of the filters? So we have, these are the common filter types. As I mentioned earlier, once the authenticated passed during the middlewares, then it should be authorization. So first we have to authorize that particular request, actually the user. So it runs first. So authorization filters runs first and determine whether the user is authorized for this request or not. Then after the authorization success, so after the authorization filter runs, then the resource filter execute. After that we will have action filters. So it will run immediately before and after an action method is called. So we know that in our controllers we will have action methods. So this action method, when it called, it will execute the action filters. Maybe it's before or after the action methods. Then next one is exception filters. So these exception filters apply the global policies to unhandled exception that occur before the response body has been written. So we know that that this part we are going to discuss in this demo. When API responses comes, it may be unhandled exception. So this filter, this exception filter modify the responses based on our configuration. And last we have result filter. So it run immediately before and after the execution of action results. So earlier we saw action filters run after or before the method. Action method is called. At the same time, the result filter will be executed after or before when the action results is executed, and the result filter will be run only when the action method executes successfully. So these are the command controller properties. So we know the what are the action, what are the action method. So when I'm explaining this demo, also I will do this explanation again. So now we will go back to our application. So now we are going to modify the API responses using filter. For that, what we are going to do is we are going to create a new event method. Okay, so let's wait. So inside our event data service, we are going to create a new event method. So our goal is we are going to modify our API response. That should be an exception. Okay, so when an exception thrown from our application, that means API response, we are going to modify that response by using filter. For that, we are going to create a new method. So inside our event service, event data service. So you know that to create the interface property, so we have this event data interface. So let me show you something. Okay, so if you see here, so we are in the event data service interface, and that interface is inherited by the event data service. By best practice, when we following a repository design pattern, we will have this in two different files. So the repositories will be there, and we know that whatever the method that we are defining inside the interface, when we inherit that interface by a concrete class, we have to implement that method. So the interface classes give us a overall idea what kind of method that we are going to implement. So this is the course for debugging and error handling. So I'm just giving an overall idea here. So I've been another sessions, another tutorial, I will explain about these design patterns and workflow of these interfaces and the concrete class. So now we are going to create a new method called enumerable object get external events method. So this method will be connect with the Google event calendar, and it will return some events for our event scheduler application, because the goal of this application is maintain the events, right, scheduling the events. So now we are going to, through this method, we are going to get some event from Google. So now we are seeing an error because we have add one method to our event data service interface, but we haven't implement that. So it will show that error message here. Interface member not is not implemented. So if you see here, so it's mentioned is not implemented. Let's implement that method inside our event data service concrete class. So in end of this session, I will explain how we can improve this code, and how we can follow the clean architecture. As of now, we are having both interface and a concrete class in one file, just for the demo purpose. Right, let's start create this method. So we have automatically generate that code. Let's see, because this is not that course, no. So we just see how it implement it. Okay, implement missing members. Let's see. Okay, I enumerable object, so it should be at last. I just bring it last, then it will give some more readability. Okay, this one. Okay, I adding this at last. Okay, then all right. Public enumerable object get extension. Sorry, external events string. It take the string user ID as a parameter as an argument, so it's throwing not implemented exception here. Okay, so this is one of exception handler, right? It will throw an exception. Let's run the application and see in a debug mode, and okay, in the debug mode run the application. I will show some exception here, not implemented exception, how it display our. And I forgot one thing, let's see, wait. So since we just created this interface, we just created this interface and the implementation, but we have to add this to our controller, then only we can get that API. So let's go to event controller. So get external, so I'm just creating a new event method. Let's stop the application. Okay, so now already we have created that particular event data service get external events method. Okay, now we have one endpoint called external. Let's call this and see, because actually it should return a exceptional. It will throw an exception because we haven't implemented that. Let's see how that exception works. Now let's try to run this particular endpoint. So it says not implemented exception, continue the application. So it says 500 server error, the method operation is not implemented. Okay, so that's how we got the first exception. And if you see type, title, status and the trace ID, we got the normal problem details. Okay, so now we are going to implement this method and see what kind of errors we are getting. And for now, so actually this method to get the list of events from Google Calendar, right? But this is not a course to implement this. So our goal is, we will call this method, but assume that Google event API is not functioning properly and that API return throwing an exception. Okay, so we are not implementing anything, and we are throwing a exception. So this when we call this method, that method will be throwing an exception. That is the goal here. Okay, therefore we haven't implemented that method. Okay, for demo purpose. Okay, we expect this method to return throw an exception. Okay, so normally this method to return list of event from Google Calendar. Okay, but in this demo our expectation is to just throw a exception. For that we are going to throw a new exception called external dependency exception. Okay, for now we just throwing this external exception, and because let's assume that API external one is not working fine. So now we will get a different exception message that okay, external component has thrown an exception because we have given external exception. So these are the inbuilt exception handlers. So we have earlier we saw not implemented exception, now external exception. These are the inbuilt exception handlers. Okay, these are the exceptions, but now we are going to create a custom exception. Okay, so when an exception comes, we can use the existing, that means inbuilt exception, or we can create a custom one and we can use that. Okay, for that because this is based on various purpose. So if we have common exception, we can use a general or inbuilt exception, but this kind of specific scenario, we have to have some specific exceptions, and we have to give some more detail to the customer. In that scenario, we can create custom exceptions. Okay, so there are two things. One is exception, second one is exception handle. So just throwing an exception is one part, but getting that exception and modify the response, and we just say that this exception is handled, these are the API response, this is the way you can fix it. So we will go one by one. First, we just create a custom exception to just throw an exception. Okay, so assume that particular API response is not works, API is not working properly. So therefore we are going to create, this is an external API, so we are going to create an exception method called external dependency exception. Okay, so let's create that. For that let's create a class called external dependency exception inside the new folder. Okay, so we're going to create a new folder here in the data service, at new folder. So maybe a directory in Visual Studio, you will call it as folder. Okay, sorry, that folder should be, so the name should be exception folder. Okay, let's see, we have deleted something else now. Okay, so inside the event data service, we are going to get a new directory called exceptions. Okay, so we are going to create the class with the name of external dependency exception. Okay, so you can prefer any names, so I just giving a meaningful name because it's regarding an external service. So therefore external dependency exception, and so it's a normal class until you inherit it from an exception class. Okay, so we are in the process of creating custom exception class, and we are going to handle this exceptions using a filter. Okay, let's see now. We have inherited this. So now it's an exception class, a custom exception class, so it has some special functions here. So let's add that constructor for this. So we know that when we type CTOR, so default constructor will be created. It's a shortcut. We have to have an HTTP status code. Okay, so namespace auto generated, and it will return, it will have an object. It can be null sometime based on the exception. So that status code. Before that we have to add those properties. What are the properties we have? HTTP status code get. Make sure that public object, it may be nullable, and the name we put as a payload. Okay, I follow the same naming standard, that's all. Alright, so here you may notice I just only have a get method, not the setter, getter. Okay, because we just getting the error. Okay, we are not be able to set that exception status code or object, right? So whatever the exception thrown, it just get and display. Alright, okay, then yeah, usual binding, initialization, status code, and payload. Alright, so that's it. Now we have created an external dependency exception. That means a customized custom exception we have created now. Okay, now what we are going to do is, in our event data service, for that method we are going to use this custom exception instead of inbuilt exception. That's the scenario. Okay, let's remove this inbuilt one. So now we are going to see this property again. So we have a status code and payload, that those are the parameters, and HTTP status code and a payload object. You can put any name for this, but make sure that these two parameters should be passed as an argument in the when you throwing this exception. Here we are going to throw new external dependency exception. We have to put that name of that exception method that we have, exception class that we have created. We have to pass HTTP status code and the payload. So here what I'm gonna do is HTTP status code, since it is not an actual exception, but because this means in this method it should, we are expecting it to throw an exception, but there is no method or logic to throw an exception. So we explicitly creating a exception, therefore we have to provide the argument here. Otherwise, this is for the demo purpose, but actual scenario in real world, your Google even API itself, if it is have any issues, by default it will throw that exception. There we just need to get that problem detail from that exception. Alright, so now we have to add the problem detail. First we do one thing. So what we are going to do is, instead of returning a problem detail, so what we are going to do is we just return a exception specific error code for this. I will tell you why I am creating like this when after I run this application. Okay, not an object, we just even defining that the object explicitly here. So we are going to have an error code, some error code like example error code or something. Okay, let's see. So now what we have done is, we have created a custom exception here, and we use that exception for our external event method. For that, we just passing a exception status code as fail dependency, and also as a object results, it will return a object with that error code, with example error code. So we can add other properties if we want. For demo purpose, I just leave it, and I will just show how this throw an exception when we calling this method. Okay, let's run the application. Okay, so run the application in debugger mode. It is taking more than usual. The build succeeded with warning. Let's call this method. So we know that we are with calling this inside our event schedule application. We have a controller called event controller. There we have this method, this endpoint external. Okay, so that we are calling. Wait, still it's loading. All right. Okay. Okay, now it's throwing an exception. Okay, use unhandled exception. Okay, just continue it. Okay, so we got error like it's a 500 internal error that we expected, because this is an internal exception. Currently you see the type, title, status and trace ID. So it says exception of type event scheduler service exception in external dependency exception. Name of our exception, external dependency exception as thrown. But if you see here, we have added an error code here, right? So we have added an error code and fail dependency status code, but we just got 500. If you see here, fail dependency is 424, but actually we got a 500 error because it's throw an exception. That's correct, but that particular exception is not handled by our application. Therefore, our decided that this particular exception was not handled by our application. That's true, because currently we just throwing an exception in a customized way. That's all. Actually, there was an exception. Earlier we just showed the exception with the inbuilt exception method, exception classes. Now we are just throwing that exception with a customized exception. We just design it, but that particular exception is not handled by our application. Therefore it's saying 500 error. Now what we are going to do is, we are going to create a filter to handle this particular exception properly, and we will design this API response according to our usual problem detailed exception as well. So we do one by one. First we are going to create an filter in our application. For that, I'm going to create a new folder. Inside our main application, project application called filters. So they are a filter. It should be a we are going to create filter that will control this exception with an actions. Okay, so now we'll create a folder. Now we are going to create a new folder of filters. There we are going to add filters for our custom exception handler. The name of the filter is obviously the name of the existing customized filter. So external dependency exception filter. So we have an exception class, external dependency. Now we are going to filter that class with using our filter. That's it. It's a normal class as of now, but to make it as a filter, we have to inherit it by I ordered filter and I action filter, because we know earlier we show that filters are action based, so based on the actions. So in the document initial also I explained when it comes after the controller, based on the actions only it activate or deactivate. So based on the action results it works. So now we have to inherit it from I action filter and I order filter. Okay, now it's throwing an error because it's saying that method implementation not done. So not implemented. If you see here, not implemented because we are we are going to inherit two interfaces in our concrete class, but we haven't implement those methods. So we can simply let's see by auto generate code whether it's showing or not. Let's try to implement missing members and see on action executing, on action executed order. Let's see. Okay, so if you see here, I order filter interface has this method. Okay, public int order external dependency exception filter, and this is the one on coming from IXN filter. So this order helps us. In the beginning of this video also I mentioned we have to define a order in our filter. So there are various filters. I showed filter 1, 2, middleware 1, 2, 3 like that. Based on that order this filter will be executed. If we have order number with maximum value, it will execute it at last. Therefore I wanted to execute this at last, therefore I am going to give a value maximum. So int order, I just going to give a value like order int maximum value, int or maximum value. That's it. So we have to add that value. Now we have added that order is should be a maximum value, then it will be executed at last. If you put a minimum value here, it will execute it at first. Okay, then we have two methods, public void on action executing. For this we are going to do anything, we just leave it as it is, because this is not, we are going to do it for this demo. Okay, because after execution only we have to have this particular exception filter should work. Okay, so I explained these things before and after. This is what I explained during the initial part of this video. Now what we are going to do is, so action executed context, action executing context is not required, then I just left as it is. Now we are going to add what logic is, we are going to make this filter to execute after that particular exception occurred. So action executed context, we have to have a if condition here. What we have to tell that if that particular context has an exception, Okay, so if that filter has an exception, if it is inside our external dependency exception, so we are going to make this filter dedicated to for our exception class, right? And we are going to check that if it is exists, there is an exception that exists with that external dependency exception, then we are going to rewrite the results context dot result. We are going to overwrite that results with a new object result. There we need to pass the same HTTP status code from our context value exception dot that payload, right? Okay, and we are using the results with the same payload, and it automatically generates this. Let's try to get that. Okay, to make some more readability, I just bring it down. Okay, this status code, I'm going to take it from the same exception handlers status code. Okay, so if you see exception dot status code, it will give an error because that should be a type conversion issue. So it should be string to type. So let me convert it to integer. Okay, so make sure that this is one part. After this, we have to tell that our application, this particular filter, properly handle the exception. This is the one important part, because otherwise our app assumes that this one also another exception like that. Okay, so we need to tell that by using our filter name is external dependency exception filter. Okay, by using this filter, we have properly handled this customized exception class external dependency exception. Okay, so we handle this particular class exceptions, that customized exception, by using our filter. Okay, so let me go through this code again. So whether we are checking first, so after executed, we are checking this context, that means this executed exception filter has an exception with that our customized exception. If it is exist, we have to override the result by using our filter by providing a new object result with the same that particular exceptions, customized exceptions to payload, plus we are modifying that status code, our result with that status code of that customized exception class status code, and then we are defining that this particular exception properly handled by our filter. Now we have created this filter. I mentioned that earlier, this filters, we have to, once we create it, we have to register it, because these actions methods are filters are controlled by action method. So that should be under the control of controllers. So if you see that our controller in our program CS controller registration, so we just have a controller without any filters, but we have to tell that at this, because this is a routine, right? So first it comes as a middleware, then it comes to pipelines, then controller and control actions. So based on that only the filter works. Therefore we have to tell that our controller registration not only register the controller, register with these options. That options are with filter. Okay, options with filter. That options we are saying filters, adding a filters. Add the name of the filter is external dependency exception filter. External dependency exception filter. Make sure that you are adding the correct filter. For this scenario it's fine because we have only one filter, but in a enterprise level application you may have many filters, so use the right filter for your exception handle. But obviously register time no problem, so you can register in any order inside a controller. Alright, so now we have created a custom exception, and for the custom exception we have created a filter and we have registered that filter as well. Okay, let's run the application and see. Make sure that everything is saved. Docker image is running. Debug it. Build succeeded. System little bit slow because of recording, I think. So still okay, so it hits by the exception. Let's try to run this method again. Okay, it's throw an exception. Okay, obviously fine, just continue it, resume it. So in VS Code we will have continue. So we are getting error code, example error code. So now you may see that, so we are calling this external event method. It's throwing a meaningful error message that whatever the message that we have defined here, shown here. But you may notice that earlier, before adding this filter, it just thrown an usual problem details without defining exact detail. So that means, so in this scenario we just used hard-coded arguments, right? But actual scenario, that Google API, maybe any external API returning an issue that with throwing an exception with the detail, unless you adding a filter, it will just display the common problem detail the same way we used in our error handler controllers, these problems. Okay, all right, so now, so where is our okay, dependency exception, services, event data service. Okay, now our application is so throwing an error, and yeah, mainly we need to see the status code is 424 failed dependency issue that we have passed here, and the status also it's passing an object with that error code that we have defined here. So same error, same exception, but with the help of filter we have modified this API response. So this is the main goal of this particular demo. So now there are many things we have discussed here. First we have we have used an inbuilt exception in our application. Then we have created and customized exception to get the meaningful response from that exception. We have created a filter to customize that, modify that particular exception details. Now we have followed some standard earlier demos. We saw that in the error handler controller and also we have created like that. So when we throwing this error handler pages, it has some format like problem detail. So let's see, if you see problem, it's return object results, and that produce a problem detail response. So it contains status code, type, title, detail, and all other details, instead of just throwing a error code only. Okay, so here we just if we can obviously hard code these values, but in a practical scenario these values be thrown by that API. For that, we are going to use the same problem detail in our exception payload as a object result. Let's stop the application, and we are going to modify this with the new problem details, that then it can return a same detail as it is. Let's remove it. New problem detail. Okay, MVC problem details with the specified properties like details. Okay, it gives a meaningful value. Status HTTP not found. Let's see, I'll modify later. Type, we have to convert this to integer, and now also this. Okay, alright, so the status should be in integer, and type, where we have to have some details where this particular, what does mean by this particular status code. Okay, that we will see in a upcoming demo, how we can customize this type according to the different status code. So now let's run the application and see customize problem details for our filter. Let's run the application. Okay, so now you can see 424 fail dependency status code with the meaningful detail that we gave. Detail could not find external event for our user. Fail dependency status code is 424, that fail dependency coming from that HTTP status code. And the type HTTP schema organization, I just add because actually when it comes from the API response, you may have a meaningful URL. There you can find status, based on the status code, how we can refactor that. Then you can see the detail in this particular URL. In the upcoming demo, we will see how we can customize this type of this problem detail based on the status code. So that's all about this demo. So we have seen in this demo how we can create a custom exception, and how we can add the filter for the particular exception to modify the API response, and how we can throw a problem detail with an exception with the help of filter. So that's all about this demo. I hope everyone enjoyed this video. I hope that see you all at another video. Have a nice day.